Hey guys, so today we're going to go through my last Duchess. So this is going to be the in-depth analysis and interpretations of the poem, and as always there will be a shorter version uploaded later this week which highlights basic key quotes and a really rough analysis. So if you're in a rush, then I recommend jumping over there. If not, we're going to jump straight in. My Last Duchess was written by Robert Browning, and a really rough overview is that a duke shows his guest a painting of his former wife. She was nicer to everybody else than she was to him, and he hints that he may have killed her. So you definitely should keep an eye out for exactly how the duke displays his jealousy, because we're going to see a lot of examples of that in the text. This almost creates a feeling of resentment that he may have had towards his wife, thus giving him a motive for actually killing her. So at the end of the poem, we see that the person, the guest that he's basically been speaking to this entire time, is actually here to fix his next marriage. So let's move on to context. Browning was the son of a wealthy bank clerk, so he was very familiar with powerful male family members. This is really evident with how he actually speaks about the duke, because obviously the duke is in a really big position of power. A duke is a title, and therefore we can suggest that his own experiences may have actually influenced the duke's character and behaviour. The duke in question is actually based on Duke Alfonso II, who ruined Ferrara, which is an area in Italy. The duke's wife also died under suspicious circumstances after getting married. Another really important thing to remember is that the duke who the poem is based on was actually married to a Medici, who was a really powerful and rich family. So it's something to remember because we're going to mention it again later. In terms of the structure, it's written as a dramatic monologue, and this kind of demonstrates his power as he doesn't really share the floor. Like when he's speaking, he kind of takes up all the time in the space. Even though the guest is present, we don't really hear the guest speaking. It's more like the duke who's kind of taken on this authority. This also demonstrates like the power and the authority that the duke has, considering that he's not really looking for a conversation partner. He's more like speaking at the guest rather than to the guest. The poem is also written in iambic pentameter, which is similar to a conversation, although the duke talks entirely. Okay, and then moving on to themes, we definitely see the power of man. So we see his jealousy, his arrogance, and his pride. We also see like exactly how possessive he is. Not only was he really possessive over his wife, he was also very possessive over like the things he has, so his possessions, such as the painting. So ultimately, we see the power of man, and we see the duke almost enjoying the power that he has as a man, a duke, and a husband. Okay, so let's move on to the actual poem. So if you haven't read it, as always, like take a moment, pause the screen, and I want you to read through it. If it's a bit small, open it up in another screen, print it out, and we can analyze it together. So this is definitely one of the longer poems in the actual collection, so get comfortable. We're gonna go through this a couple of lines at a time. Okay, so it says, "That's my last Duchess painted on the wall, looking as if she were alive." Firstly, with my, look at the use of the possessive pronoun. So he uses the word my as if he owns her and not the painting. Moving on to the next line, it says, "looking as if she were alive." So look at the tone here. It's almost sinister and it's quite dark. So, and it's the first mention that she's actually dead. So the use of the sinister tone here kind of suggests that something isn't quite right, and we get a couple of more of these as we go along, so definitely keep it in mind and definitely like try to notice a pattern as you go along. We see the duke almost slipping in his facade, as sometimes he's seen as, really like devoting husband, and at times you see exactly what he really thought of her. So his tone like immediately switches again in the third line where he mentions Fra Pandolf. So this is actually a reference to another painter, and what he's actually doing here, he's basically kind of name dropping who made it. And this is quite weird because the line prior he's talking about, his wife, his late wife, who's basically passed away, and now he's name dropping who actually made it as if he's almost proud of the painting. So that contrast in tones is actually quite suspicious. We see the duke's first use of his power with, "Will you please sit and look at her?" So here he's actually talking to his guests, and he's using a rhetorical question where he's, asking the guests to really appreciate the work, but in actual fact it's more like he's commanding the guest to look at the painting because he's not really giving him an option. He goes on to talk about how the guest can only see this painting because of him. So this is shown with, "The curtain I have drawn for you, but I..." So here again he's asserting his power. He's saying that by his own grace that the guest can witness such a spectacle. So this is actually quite ironic because when his wife was actually alive, he couldn't stop the men from looking at her. We find out later on that he was very jealous of the attention that she got. And now he's so proud of the fact that only because of him, other men can see her. So we see an example of his jealousy in the next few lines with, "'Twas not her husband's presence only called that spot of joy into the Duchess's cheek." So here he's basically using a metaphor with spot of joy, and he's kind of suggesting that it's not only her husband's presence that made her happy, but it was also other men too. So him and the way he speaks quite ill of her is actually the first time that we see his jealousy, and the first time where we notice that there were many problems in the marriage, and one of them was almost like the way that men looked at her, but he's almost like suggesting that she enjoyed the attention too. So, furthermore, we see this line here that says, half flush that dies along her throat. So here again, we see another contrast in the tone as we saw before in line 2. So the tone here, when he talks about dies along her throat, it's very sinister. So it's almost like hinting at perhaps how she may have died. So we see more inconsistencies within his personality and his demeanour through the next few lines. So the line that says, a heart, how shall I say, too soon made glad, basically demonstrates his fake modesty. The use of punctuation here definitely changes up the structure a little bit. So it kind of forces the reader to pause. And when he says, like, how shall I say, it's almost like he's thinking of a nice way to put it. So he's almost trying to mitigate his words, which basically kind of demonstrates that he's trying to be a good person, trying to say in a sweet way, but we know what his actual intentions are. Repetition again carries on with too soon made glad, too easily impressed. She liked whatever she looked on and her looks went everywhere. So here he's saying that she was too easily impressed by others, and he's almost suggesting that she was unfaithful because her eyes wandered. He's saying that her looks went everywhere, and everywhere that she looked, whatever she saw, she was impressed and she liked it. So that's quite a cruel thing to say about somebody, especially when they passed away, and especially when they were your wife. We see a lot of his anger here because, he was trying to be modest. He was trying to kind of mitigate his words, but then he goes off on a rant about what she was like and what he thought of her and the accusations he had of her. These accusations don't stop there either, as we see this in the next few lines too. So look at the lines, all in each, would draw from her like their approving speech, or blush at least. So here he's saying that she basically approved of everyone's attention and she really enjoyed it. He also uses imagery with blushing to show almost like a flirtatious attention. So at this point, we know that the Duke wasn't okay with the attention that his ex-wife had, but then we see his jealousy a little bit more. So look at the lines here, as if she ranked my gift of a 900 years old name with anybody's gift. So here he's suggesting that he almost gifted her with marriage and she took on the name. But his jealousy is shown because he's saying that the gift that he gave her, like the gift of marriage, as if he did a favour to her, is ranked the same as with any other gift that she received. So not only do we see that he's quite jealous, we also see that he's quite prideful of his power and in his status. The irony here is that the Duke, who this poem is actually based off of, actually married a Medici, and Medici is a very, very powerful old Italian family. So she came from her own status and she came from her own wealth, but the Duke was almost quite angry that she didn't accept his name as more of a gift than she actually did. So it almost implies that he's angry that the gift that he gave to his wife, his name, she didn't see it in high regard because she came from her own wealth. However, that is one interpretation, and another interpretation might be that she may have been quite prideful. She may have been quite happy to marry into such a high family. However, it might just be his jealousy that's almost twisting the narrative. It might just be his perceptions of what he thought his wife was like and what she enjoyed instead of what the actual reality was. His jealousy might have actually blinded him into how she felt about him and how she almost felt about everybody else, like the comparison. We can definitely support this second interpretation with the fact that we know he's quite jealous. We know he's jealous about the attention that she received. We see a bit more of his jealousy and anger in the next few lines as well. So firstly, we see the line, herself be less than so. So the fact that she got all this attention and the fact that, he thinks that she liked it, he's almost suggesting that by doing so, by being appreciative of the attention that she got, she's almost like lessening himself. And he's almost like shaming her for the attention that she received and the way that she reacted to it. However, he's quite prideful of this with the line never to stoop, so he's saying that he wouldn't overcome his ego to say that this was a problem. He refuses to admit or acknowledge exactly how much this irritated him, and he's saying that he would never stoop to almost like this jealous behaviour, even though that's exactly what he did. But because it still happened, we see his pride and his arrogance because he's almost unable to admit the jealousy that he actually felt. So we know exactly how he felt about the attention that his late wife received. However, up until this point, it's seen as quite harmless. It's only here where the poem takes a bit more of a darker turn that we begin to question exactly how she died. And it's at this point also where he talks about exerting his power that he has over her. So firstly, he begins to question her faithfulness to the marriage again. So he says this with the lines, who passed without much the same smile. And what he's basically trying to imply here, that yes, she may have smiled at him, but what if she smiled at everybody else like that? What if the attention that he was, meant to receive as a husband was almost passed on to other people too? This is again like another example of his jealousy, but he also like displays his insecurities. The insecurities then go on to him doing something a bit more drastic. It says, I gave commands and the smile stopped altogether. So what this means was he started to control her more, and as he did, her joy kind of stopped. Also, the commands show his, abuse of power as a man. It could be as a man, it could be as a husband, or it could even be his position. So it's almost like he commanded her, like he didn't really treat her as a human being. It's almost like he had this authority over her and he exercised it and he used it. And as he did, as he was quite forceful with his power, her smile stopped. So, one interpretation of this is that, she was less happy, she was less joyful. It kind of damaged her as a person. However, the use of altogether leads on to a second interpretation. So altogether kind of has the connotation of being forever. So is he saying that once he used his power, it's almost like she stopped existing? So is he almost implying that him using his power and him doing something as a man, as a duke, as a husband, almost killed her? Also, the use of all smiles stopped together. Is he talking about the smiles from his wife and also the smiles from the suitors, from the men that she was getting attention from? It's almost as if like he exerted his power, and not only did he get rid of her, he almost got rid of like the suitors, the people that he was so jealous of as well. He kind of put an end to that relationship and there was a finality. So from this we can almost certainly suggest that he may have had a hand in her demise. Although we don't really get any more clues as to whether this is actually the reality, because as you know, the Duke is very smart. He contrasts his personalities very, very quickly, and anytime he shows like a glimmer of his true personality, this kind of dangerous, this jealous nature, he changes it very quickly and he's very, very quick to cover it. So then we're going to realize that the person he's speaking to, his guest, is actually there to fix his next marriage. And he says a line of mine for dowry will be disallowed. So here we can almost suggest that Browning is implying that the Duke is getting married almost for the dowry. So dowry is the money that the bride's family would pay to him, because we know that she was from the Medici family, and the Medici family were very, very, very rich. So here you can almost imply that he may have had her killed for the money. And we can almost suggest that history may repeat itself with this new bride also, kind of giving it like a sinister tone, and we almost feel sorry for the new bride. However, before he can really expand more on that, he again changes the subject. So the Duke has his skill, but he brings up what he wants, so he shows a glimmer of his true personality, and is very, very quick to mask it. So he speaks about this dowry, but then he immediately goes back to his collection, goes back to his possessions, and he goes right back to showing it off again. So you can see this with the lines, notice Neptune though, taming a seahorse, though a rarity. So, we kind of almost finish the poem off as he refers back to his art collection, and it ultimately demonstrates that he is obsessed with his material goods. Okay guys, so that was My Last Duchess. We definitely explored like how the Duke is very obsessed with the power that he has and the authority, because we see how he exercised it over his wife and how he was almost offended that the wife wasn't almost more grateful that he gave her this through marriage, this being his name. We also see a lot of his jealousy in how, she received attention from other men, and we almost see his insecurities because he didn't like the way that she responded to it. We also need to notice that this is all entirely from his perspective, and we see deep, deep flaws in his character, so we can't suggest that this may have been the reality. We also see a lot of the use of sinister tones as the poem really displays certain aspects, certain very, very dark aspects of his personality. For example, how he talks about her throat, how he talks about how his power almost took away his bride's life. However, even though we see glimpses of this, the poet is very, very quick to kind of hide it, thus almost portraying that the Duke may have actually had something to hide. So guys, that was definitely a very, very long poem, and I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to check out my 5-minute version of this. So I'm going to be going through this very, very quickly and highlighting key quotes. So it may actually be useful for your revision, or you can refer back to it afterwards. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this, and yeah, subscribe. I'll speak to you guys soon.